Hello, hi, good morning. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, I'm Zoe and I make lifestyle videos about books, beauty, and sustainability. And today we are going to be doing my October reading wrap-up. Right off the bat, guys, I'm going to admit that it's going to be a quick one because I did not read a lot in the month of October. I got ill at one point with a common cold. And I also had a week where my partner, my boyfriend, was there all week, so I didn't read as much because I kind of feel like rude reading in front of him as opposed to like, I don't know, engaging in conversation or something. So I only read 3 books, but I am going to mention one more because I finished it on November 1st. So I feel like we can kind of just pretend. We'll just shove it into this month. And I'm also going to discuss a couple of books that I DNF'd this month as well. I don't normally love to do that because I feel like if you don't have anything nice to say, like just don't say anything at all. But I'm trying to pad out this video, so bear with me. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive on into the books. So the first book I read this month, I read as an audiobook through the Lilly app, which is an app that sort of connects me with my library's collection of audiobooks. And this was Invisible Woman by Criado Pérez. So this book is about the ways that women get ignored in research and data, and how in a lot of research, women aren't used in the samples or like as participants, but yet the results of the studies are generalized to the entire population, including women, and how this can impact women in very real and sometimes dangerous ways. I really love this book. I especially was impressed by the breadth of this book. I wasn't expecting it to cover so many different areas of life, spheres of research. I just found it really interesting, especially as a research assistant myself, I'm in this world. And I found it funny because it kind of challenged some of my own personal beliefs in that I often find that gender can be thrown in as, at least in psychology, gender can be thrown in as kind of like an afterthought variable, in the sense that we create these narratives about differences in gender when they might not really be there. If you're looking at differences across groups, but you're not looking at differences within groups, so the variability there. So for example, sometimes women can end up being more different from each other than they are from men necessarily. And I find that a lot of times, at least in psychology, the differences between men and women are exaggerated. I've also heard that research that looks at similarities between the sexes have a way more difficult time getting funding than research that looks at sex differences. And again, that kind of feeds into a heteronormative and sexist narrative about men and women, particularly cis straight men and women. So I thought this book was really interesting because it sort of presented a counter narrative to that and how gender can be really important in research. I think we need to be careful about the reasoning behind doing a study, who is the study for, and what are the aims of the study, and then carefully consider who the population should be, the variables used. I think we just need to be thoughtful and intentional about these things. So anyway, I really love this book. In particular, I found it interesting how gender neutral language, which we can see as a super progressive thing, especially for non-binary folks, can in fact leave out women. So if you use a gender neutral term that people automatically associate with men, it effectively erases women from the language, which I think is a super interesting point. So in those cases, it would be important to use both terms, the male term, the female term, or to come up with a new term that people associate equally with both men, women, and could be applied to non-binary folks. So overall, I think it was a super interesting read. I love the points that Criado Pérez brings up, and I definitely think it's worth a read, especially if you are someone in the field of research. You should absolutely pick up this book. Or healthcare. If you're in the field of healthcare, I think you should also probably read this book. The next book I finished was A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This was part of my spooky TBR, and I did not expect this one to have sort of dark academia vibes to it, but it absolutely did, because one of the settings is at a university, and academia is a big sort of theme within the book. One thing I will say is that the author has a wine blog, and that shows a lot in the book because entire paragraphs will be dedicated to describing the notes of a wine, and wine appears way more often and like more, it's noticeable. There's a lot of attention is paid to wine in this book. And the other thing is that the author of this book is also herself like an actual historian, like the characters. So again, I think that passion really shows through. So if you're not interested in either of those things, they might kind of take you out of the book. But I have started reading the second one because I did really enjoy this one. And both of those things are not as apparent in the second one. So if that's something that you didn't enjoy about the first book, this is the All Souls trilogy, by the way. So if that's something that you didn't enjoy, fear not. It doesn't affect the second book. At least. Can't speak to the third yet, but at least the second one is not as much of an issue. I've also been enjoying the TV adaptation. However, I will say that they do whisper a lot in this show and like speak very softly. It's a little bit jarring again. It's something that takes you out of the story. And also, I'm not 100% sold on the casting of Matthew Claremont. I'll leave it at that. I do really like some of the diversity that was brought into this cast though, and how they chose to make certain characters who weren't explicitly described as people of color. I think that really adds to the story. So going to be continuing with the series, going to be continuing with the show. Did enjoy it. Is it perfect? No. Is it fluffy romance at times? Is it brain candy? Yes, absolutely. But I think sometimes we just need that in our lives. So the next book I read was Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. This is a children's book that features 100 stories of different women, either contemporary or historical, just influential figures. I'd actually purchased this as a gift for my younger cousin, and this is the first time that I myself got to read it. And I really, really loved this book. I wish this was something that existed when I was a kid, because while I did recognize some of the names in the book, there was a ton of them that I had never even heard of. I think the authors did a really good job of choosing diverse people in terms of their field, in terms of their race, where they came from. I just think it's really valuable for girls to see themselves represented and to know that there are possibilities for them, to be shown all the different things that they can achieve. So I really love this book and everything it stands for. And the reason I read that book was because I got a copy of the latest rendition of Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls #4, and this one is 100 Real Life Tales of Black Girl Magic. I got this as a ebook from NetGalley. So this one was just recently released on September the 28th, and again, love this book. I think I actually recognized more of the figures in this book than I did the first one, but I love that they dedicated an entire book just specifically to Black women and women of color. I think that representation is important. I love learning about people I'd never heard of. I love learning more about people whose names I had heard of. I think it's important as adults to occasionally dip into the world of children's literature, if not only to be able to recommend books to people who do have kids or to kids in our lives. I think it's interesting to read what people are marketing to children, just to, I don't know, I think it's an interesting perspective. But yeah, anyway, ultimately, like, both of these were 5-star reads. I think everything that I've mentioned so far was a 5-star read. And I absolutely recommend these books, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult. I'm happy they exist. I wish they had existed when I was growing up. And I also am super happy that they seem to have kind of started a trend. Now, there are a bunch of different books like these that kind of like have collections of famous either women or queer people. Like, I've seen tons of themes of these where you're just exploring people that might not otherwise get talked about as much. So yeah, technically I didn't finish that last one in October. It was November 1st, but I'm throwing it in here because I know that November is going to be a better reading month for me, so I'm not worried about booking up my next video. And I am also planning on reading the second book from this collection next month. I don't have access to the third one through the library, so I might have to buy it someday, but otherwise, yeah, no, really enjoying the series and will continue with it. So those were all the books I read. On to the 2 books that I DNF'd, and the first one is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I'm so sorry. I feel like people are going to hate me for this one. This one I put on my spooky TBR, and it was one of the few books that had dark academia themes. I didn't like it. I couldn't get into it. I found myself reading so slowly, and I do this every time to myself that I am having trouble with a book, is I essentially gaslight myself. I'm like, oh my God, I'm such a slow reader. I've lost my touch. I just can't get into books. I'm in a reading slump. No. I'm not in a reading slump. I'm not a bad reader. I just didn't like this book because the second I picked up A Discovery of Witches, which is an equally, if not more, chunky book, like boom, read it in a few days. 500 pages, whatever, we can handle it. This though, I could not even get 30 pages in. I don't know what it was. There was just something about the setting, the plot, the atmosphere, the characters. I don't think any of it was really working for me or enthralling me in the story. So I'm DNFing it for now. Please let me know if you think I'm making a horrible mistake, because I'm absolutely open to hearing that. But for now, this one was just not for me. And then finally, the second and last book that I DNF'd was Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. So I started reading this one. Again, I think I got about 30 pages in, and then I decided to switch to audiobook because, again, I was like kind of having a slow go at it. And I was like, maybe if I read it as an audiobook, it'll be faster. I got about 2 hours into what I think is a 14-hour audiobook. And again, this was just not working for me. And I love vampire books. I didn't love the dynamic between Louis and the boy. I don't think he's named until like probably the end of the book. I found that the story kind of seemed predictable in that, okay, like this kid is interviewing this vampire and obviously by the end he's gonna want to become a vampire. So I feel like there was like no tension there for me because you kind of like know what's going to happen. And then in terms of the lore of the vampires, I wasn't in love with it. I don't really love that they have to, you know, go into a coffin and sleep all night and like avoid the sun. I don't know, that just seems really tedious and annoying, and then you lose out on all of the hours of the day that could be used for plot development. There was also a huge religion aspect to this book, which like I didn't love, and not because like spirituality isn't something that like interests me at all, but I just wasn't feeling like it was adding to the book in a way that again increased tension. I was just very much like not invested. And overall, like it's bizarre because Anne Rice is obviously a woman, but this very much felt like a book written for men. And like this is a fairly modern book, but like it felt very old and not modern at all. It was just, I don't know, there was just something off about this whole book for me. So yeah, those were the 3/4 books that I read this month and the 2 that I DNF'd. If you are having a slow reading month or had a slow reading month like me, or you are in a reading slump, I just want to remind you that you are valid. That you are allowed to have slow reading months and to not be as productive in your reading. That's totally okay. That doesn't make you any less of a reader. That doesn't make you a bad person. It is not something to feel ashamed about. We need to normalize not being super productive. It's not about how many titles you can get through. I think it is about the joy you derive from the books. So if you don't like a book, no shame in DNFing it. Honestly, if I had dropped this one a lot sooner, I probably would have read a lot more. I'm not totally sure if I want to do a November TBR because I feel like a lot of stuff that I want to read is kind of just like stuff I hadn't gotten to from my previous TBRs, either the spooky one or the October one is just kind of like trickling into November. So let me know if you still want to see that or if we can just skip November and move straight into December. But the theme of November for me in terms of reading is definitely like being kind to myself, but also like trying to get back up on that horse and read more than I did last month. I'm definitely going to take advantage of some ebooks and audiobooks to make things easier for myself, and then again just like read things that I enjoy and not force myself through things that I am not enjoying. But I'd love to hear if you guys have any recommendations for books that got you out of reading slumps, or like brain candy, like those kind of books that are really like quick to get through, something that's not going to demand a whole ton of like thought or energy that you just enjoy for the fun of reading, the joy of reading. I'd love to hear your recommendations down below. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope to see you back here again next time. Bye.